it was kind of hard for me to choose on how I wanted to do the Cosmic Fury review. When I watched the entire season, I was like, I wanted to get my thoughts around it. Do I wanted to do it in a, just one big 30, 40-minute review of the entire season, or would I want to look at it through each of the episodes? Because there's a lot of high, mid, and low moments of the season. It's not perfect, but I think the best option is to review each of the episodes, because Cosmic Fury is something that Power Ranger hasn't done in a very long time. There's a lot of things behind the scenes that people didn't like, suits and this. Now, I do have to be honest, the first episode of Cosmic Fury isn't the greatest thing out there. It's mid, and I do, for the most part, overall enjoy how much effort they did put into all the characters, their arcs, and bringing back old characters and how they fit in with the new stuff. But let's begin with the biggest issue I have with the first episode is the explanation of Zedd's backstory. Now, the one thing I really hate is when they do exposition dumps in anything, because it usually ends up not being good. Now, this is a theory of mine, but I think the reason why this happened was because we already had the Once and Always special, and Rita had come back, and basically we shown that the spirits of anyone of evil that was wiped out by Zordon's energy wave, their evil spirits still exist separated from the good side of them. The way they explain Zedd coming back is that his evil spirit that was separated from his human good spirit was trapped in some sort of crystal, and a group of people from the Squid Incorporated found him and broke him free, and they all started working together. It's a very rushed job of how Zedd came back and these new villains that are working with him. Realistically, Zedd would have already known all this information, and why are they explaining it to him over again? Obviously, it's for our benefit, and I wish this was done in the previous season. It just felt like, oh, we have to answer how did Zedd come back, because out of obligation, versus we wanted to tell a compelling story to do it. But one of the biggest positives I can give the first episode is them dealing with the Morphing Masters. Now, one of the major criticisms that I have and a lot of other people have about the Morphing Master is their godlike abilities, because when we got introduced to the Morphing Masters and basically the beings that can control the morphing grid in some way, it felt like, oh, A, they're copying, the Ancients from Stargate, if you know that franchise, but B, you're introducing us to these beings that could virtually do everything. Now, granted, they did have this whole thing of not interfering, and Green decided to interfere, but it brings in a lot of plot holes and issues with can they reverse death like we've seen so far? Or if they're so powerful, how did Zedd get free? But thanks to this episode, they finally showcase that no, the Morphing Masters are not invincible or godlike. They do have limitations and flaws, and it does work in the overall direction they initially set up. So I was like, oh, okay. They showcase that they can be captured. But two, another thing that I also thought about was that, oh, maybe this is the reason why the Morphing Masters didn't want to get involved. If we get captured, any villain could use us in some capacity to overthrow the Rangers and various planets throughout the galaxy. So it's best to us to never interfere, forever them to get the chance of taking that power and abusing the morphing grid. How do I feel that Billy came back? I was happy that Billy came back because, we're bringing back Zedd. It wouldn't feel right that we would have no connection whatsoever to anyone from MMPR, but also because Davey Yost left the show under poor conditions. He never really got his character to wrap up, and it makes a really nice bow of having MMPR characters begin the series and end the series. And I like that Mechanic also came into the show. A lot of people love Kelson Henderson. He's kind of become the ambassador of the New Zealand crew of Power Rangers. But I did get annoyed at a couple of things. Obviously, bringing back Zedd, bringing back Billy is a big deal to the audience. We haven't seen these characters for so many years. It's cool to see him again. I didn't really care for the whole fanboying aspect of Squillias. Okay, we just got introduced to this Squid incorporated gang of bad guys. But now you're going to introduce us to Squillia, basically, obsessed with, YouTubing, streaming. And I don't even have the problem with her acting like a human. We've had all the human elements throughout the galaxy before. Remember Planet Onyx, where they had the whole Western thing? No matter what she would do, she was just so obnoxious, and not in a good way. It's just like, were you trying to have another Squat and Babu on your case? I didn't really like Squat and Babu in general, but they didn't annoy me. She did. I think if they wanted to have more of an MMPR element come back with Zedd, why didn't you make monsters that were more closer to Goldar and Scorpina? Those two were great in season 1, and I would have had totally no problem of having completely new monsters done in that way versus doing the Squat and Babu. It wasn't funny, it was too annoying. But the number one thing that came out of the first episode is Ollie turning evil. Now, this is a continuation of Ollie being evil from the past season, so it's working onto that story. It was finally a true evil Ranger arc. Like I've said many times, the one thing that ruined Zedd was him being, complained about by parents. They made him stupid. So when he turned Ollie into an evil Ranger, finally we're seeing Zedd do something bad and evil, so you hate him again. So it works on 2 levels. Even though it is a detriment to Ollie being evil for nearly the entire season, so he doesn't have the chance to use his cosmic fury powers for most of the show. Out of what we get from the evil Ollie arc, I think it was well worth that sacrifice. Speaking of Zado, now I don't have a problem about Zado's arc throughout the season, but I think it was just done in a stupid way. Obviously, at the end of Dino Fury, Zado died, but right before the show ended, Zado came back to life, and we were like, wait, what's going on? What is this? And we were going to go on to this next mission into Cosmic Fury. When we get into Cosmic Fury at the first episode, and then he gets thrown out of the show again. Why do it this way? If you were going to have Zado be thrown out because you want to, bring up Amelia in her arc, fine. I think it would have worked much more better to keep Zado a mystery for most of the season until he actually came back into the story later on, where you bring him back and you're like, oh my god, Zado's alive? It would have been much better for Zado's character overall, and it would have been much better for Amelia's character overall. Obviously, you could see that they were setting up Amelia's character to become the leader of the team. They did it in the very first episode of Dino Fury Season 2, but then it was kind of basically ignored all the way until pretty much the ending of Dino Fury, and then they kind of bring it up over here again, then it's off and on. It would have given more time to Amelia to build up that leader cycle. I think that's just one of the aspects of Amelia's journey, just being weak. 1 minute it's off, 1 minute it's on, 1 minute it's off, and I think it would have just worked much better if they had done it that way. The biggest thing in the room is the complaints of, Cosmic Fury not using the Q Ranger suits, sticking to only using the Zord footage, aka MMPR Season 2. I don't have a problem with them not using Q Ranger suits for various story reasons, because a lot of times, Super Sentai footage can get in the way. However, I'm not happy about all of it. There are things that I will be complaining about later on. The bigger issue is, again, episode 1 having to set up all this material. There was not enough time. You really needed technically 2 episodes in order to tell this story. You had to build up Zedd, and there was a lot of information that we have to bring in. And it shows, especially in the altar scene, when the Red Morphing Master gave the staff to Javi and he saw the altar, like, okay, this is a big deal. There's Zords that were on the planet that we didn't know about. And they're all pretty much figuring out everything right away. Like Aeon, it's like, oh, look at this. There's like this hole in top of the altar. Oh, well, maybe the staff is the key. And it's just like, how did you get that from the hole in the altar to the Morphing Master staff being a key? None of them look like they would ever fit into it, especially whenever they do the whole thing where they use Mick as like, I've heard rumors of this ancient Cosmic Fury Zord. I always hate it when they do this, because it's basically like, oh yeah, we're throwing something out of our hat at the last minute, but we have a character that knew about it, many years ago as a rumor, so please believe it. We didn't just toss this into the show at the last minute. That was one of the bad things they did to him in Ninja Steel, and they ended up repeating it here. But also, you had Billy here with you. He was the one who would be perfect to figure these things out. It would have been a good way to give a moment of breath and let Billy figure certain things out. Now, about Javi being a hothead, they were in a rock and hard place. and someone needed to act while everyone was being calm, and Javi did the right course of action. But at the same time, I love that there were consequences. Too many times in Power Rangers where we had a serious situation where people are in a life and death situation and someone gambles and they do it, they save the day, everyone survives, there's no consequences whatsoever, especially like, Green with Evil. Javi did do the right thing, but at the cost of, losing his arm. Now, there were a couple things in the later episodes I really didn't like, because it's just like, everyone was like, okay, you'll be fine. And that was mainly a ratings thing, because again, this is a Y7 show, you can't spook kids too much, but at the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, why didn't you make Cosmic Fury PG? It just needed to be a little bit higher than usual, and then you could have done the Javi story in a more realistic fashion. The Chance Perez, Javi's actor, how he portrayed it very realistically. Like, oh my God, I lost my arm. It was just that everyone else around him was like, no, it'll be okay, it'll be fine. And everyone was just, reassuring him. It's like, not everyone would act that way, but some of them should have been emotional of Javi losing his arm. There were a lot of good things in this first episode. Like I said, Ollie turning evil, showing consequences, bringing Billy back, but there were other things that I really didn't like. Zedd and all his stuff, and Zato being thrown out at, within just minutes of him coming back. This was the biggest thing that I worried about when they said Cosmic Fury is only going to have 10 episodes. Power Rangers has been suffering of low episode count for many, many years. We initially had 40 episodes a season, and that was kind of like the point where it's like, that's good enough. It's a little bit shorter than Super Sentai, but it still gives enough time for, a season to develop and characters to do. But then it got dropped to 38, then 32 through the Disney season, and then 20 realistically, because you could ignore the Halloween and Christmas specials, and then we're finally down to 10. How are they going to tell this story in 10 episodes? We have to talk about Zato. We have to bring in new Zords from the new Q Ranger footage. We have Billy here. We have Mick here. We had all the stuff from the RAFCON storyline in the end of season 2. There's a lot of stuff to cover in Cosmic Fury, and then we're going to go through this grand time of going through space and traveling, and they have to introduce all these new powers and weapons and gear, even with them sticking strictly to filming most of the stuff themselves so they can do almost what they want. That is really the crux of Cosmic Fury's issues. It's just they just didn't have enough time. If they had maybe 15 episodes, I think it would have done much better overall, because episode 1 really needed to be 2 episodes, especially with Ollie. You have such a really cool idea to give us a new evil ranger that sticks throughout the entire season. It would have been better if he would have broken the spell around episode 10, and then we would have 5 episodes of him being good. But I will give credit where credit's due. The Morphing Masters had to be knocked down a peg. You can't have these all-powerful beings in a show where you're just like, well, why didn't they intervene at this season or in this moment? There's a ton of episodes that I can list out, so I'm glad they showcased that they were able to be captured and be manipulated into whatever they needed to for the story. I think overall the writers were overwhelmed. It's like, I have to tell all this stuff in 25 minutes, so they kind of were like, well, I need to give a lot of these characters some lines here and there, but unfortunately I think as a first episode it just wasn't good. Now let's see where episode 2 takes us. Will I have the same complaints from episode 1, or will it be a bigger improvement now that we have all that stuff out of the way?